The evidence box sat untouched for nearly a quarter century, gathering dust in the basement archives of the Montgomery Police Department. Detective Sarah Reeves pulled on her latex gloves, carefully lifting the lid that hadn't been opened since 2010, the last time someone believed they might solve the disappearance of Rachel Henderson. Inside, a single white sneaker, size 7, with frayed laces and a scuff mark on the toe. Beside it, a purple notebook with water-damaged pages, its spiral binding rusted with age. For 24 years, these items had whispered their secrets to empty rooms, waiting for someone to finally listen. "I think we've got something," Sarah said, her voice barely audible as she held a page to the light. The lab had found microscopic evidence invisible to investigators in 2001, a fingerprint fragment, preserved where it shouldn't have been. 48 hours later, the quiet neighborhood of Oak Hill erupted with flashing police lights as officers led a handcuffed figure from the colonial-style home on Maple Street. Neighbors stood frozen on their front lawns, mouths agape, watching as someone they'd known for decades, someone who'd attended their barbecues, coached Little League, and served on the PTA, was placed into the back of a police cruiser. "I've lived next door to him for 18 years, whispered Ellen Dawson to the local news crew that had descended on the scene. "Our kids grew up together. How could we not have known?" That's the question that haunted Montgomery, Alabama in the summer of 2025. How did the person responsible for one of the city's most heartbreaking cold cases hide in plain sight for 24 years? How did they sit across dinner tables, attend church services, and look into the eyes of a grieving family without ever revealing their terrible secret? The answer lies in the twisted details of a case that began on a warm May night in 2001, when 17-year-old Rachel Henderson vanished while walking home from her shift at a Chevron gas station, leaving behind only a scattered shoe and notebook as silent witnesses to her fate. Before we dive into this shocking story that rocked an Alabama community to its core, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel brings you the most compelling true crime cases with details you won't find anywhere else, and you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Montgomery, Alabama, in May 2001, was a city of contrasts. The state capital buzzed with political energy while maintaining its small-town southern charm. Azaleas bloomed in carefully tended gardens, and the Alabama River curved lazily through downtown. By day, the city sweltered under temperatures that regularly climbed into the high 80s. By night, a gentle breeze would sweep through neighborhoods, carrying the scent of magnolias and barbecue. The west side of Montgomery, where the Henderson family lived, was solidly middle class. Rows of modest ranch-style homes with well-kept yards, American flags fluttering from front porches, and kids' bicycles abandoned on driveways. It was the kind of neighborhood where people noticed unfamiliar cars and checked on elderly neighbors during summer heat waves. Rachel Henderson was the kind of teenager adults described as responsible. At 17, she balanced her junior year at Robert E. Lee High School with a part-time job at the Chevron station on Atlanta Highway. Her teachers noted she was quiet but engaged, maintaining a solid B average despite her work schedule. She wasn't part of the popular crowd, but she had a tight-knit group of friends who shared her love of 90s alternative rock and weekend trips to the Eastdale Mall. Rachel was the glue, her best friend Amber Wilkins would later tell investigators. She was the one who made sure everyone got home safe, who remembered birthdays, who took notes for you when you were sick. Standing 5'4" with shoulder-length brown hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, Rachel wasn't flashy. She favored jeans, sneakers, and band t-shirts covered by her green windbreaker on cooler evenings. The purple notebook she carried everywhere contained song lyrics, poetry, and detailed plans for her future, community college, then transferring to Auburn University to study veterinary medicine. May 18, 2001 began as an ordinary Friday. Rachel attended school, turned in a biology project on cellular respiration, and made plans to see a movie with friends on Saturday. Security footage from the high school showed her walking out at 3:15 p.m., backpack slung over one shoulder, laughing at something a classmate said. She arrived for her shift at the Chevron at 4 p.m., relieving the afternoon cashier, Mike Daniels. The store's security camera captured Rachel behind the counter, ringing up customers, restocking the cooler with sodas, and occasionally jotting notes in her purple notebook during quiet moments. She seemed normal, maybe a little tired, Daniels later reported. Nothing that would make you think anything was wrong. At 10:15 p.m., Rachel completed her closing duties, counted the register, and prepared to leave. The security footage, grainy and captured at an awkward angle, showed her pulling on her green windbreaker and slinging her backpack over her shoulder. She waved goodbye to the night manager and pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot, disappearing from the camera's view at exactly 10:17 p.m. The walk home should have taken 8 minutes. Rachel's route was simple: south on Woodmere Boulevard, then east on Carter Hill Road for 3 blocks before turning onto her residential street. Streetlights illuminated most of the path, though a section near Huntingdon College was notoriously dark due to a broken lamp the city had yet to repair. Carol Henderson called the police at 1:07 a.m., her voice trembling as she explained that her daughter had never been late before, never failed to call if plans changed. By 2:30 a.m., patrol officers were combing the route between the Chevron and the Henderson home. Officer James Tanner spotted it first, a white sneaker lying in the grass near the darkened section of Carter Hill Road. 20 feet away, pages from a purple notebook fluttered against a chain-link fence, some already soaked by the sprinkler system that had activated in a nearby yard. It looked like she'd been running, Tanner would later testify. The way her things were scattered, it wasn't like she'd dropped them. It was like she'd been trying to get away from something, or someone. By dawn, yellow police tape cordoned off 4 blocks of Carter Hill Road. Detectives photographed the scene while K9 units attempted to pick up Rachel's scent. The dogs followed a trail that abruptly ended at the curb, suggesting Rachel had been forced into a vehicle. I'm curious, where are you watching this video from? Drop your location in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how these stories reach people across the country and around the world. Plus, I'd love to know if any of you are familiar with Montgomery or this case. The initial investigation faced immediate challenges. No witnesses came forward despite the residential setting. The security cameras at Huntingdon College were aimed at campus buildings, not the street where Rachel disappeared. Rain began falling at 4:30 a.m., potentially washing away crucial evidence before technicians could process the entire scene. Detective Marcus Wilson, the lead investigator assigned to the case, faced mounting pressure as local media descended on the neighborhood. "We're treating this as a high-priority missing persons case," he told reporters gathered outside the Henderson home. "We have reason to believe Rachel did not leave willingly." What Wilson didn't reveal to the press was that the scattered pages from Rachel's notebook contained something disturbing, a recent entry where she mentioned feeling uncomfortable about being watched during her walks home. The entry was dated just 3 days before her disappearance. By nightfall on May 19th, Rachel's school photo was plastered across local news broadcasts, and a community that had always felt safe was locking its doors, keeping children inside, and wondering if a predator walked among them. By Monday morning, Rachel Henderson's disappearance had transformed from a local concern to a regional emergency. The Montgomery Advertiser ran a front-page story with the headline, "Teen Vanishes, Community Rallies as Search Intensifies." Local radio stations interrupted programming with descriptions of Rachel and the clothes she was last seen wearing. Flyers with her smiling school photo appeared on telephone poles, storefront windows, and community bulletin boards across 3 counties. The response from Montgomery residents was immediate and overwhelming. Over 200 volunteers gathered at First Baptist Church on South Perry Street, organizing into search teams under the guidance of law enforcement. They combed through neighborhoods, wooded areas, drainage ditches, and abandoned buildings within a 5-mile radius of where Rachel's shoe and notebook were found. "This is what Montgomery does," said Pastor William Hayes as he handed out bottled water to searchers. "When one of our children is in trouble, we come together. We don't rest until they're home." The Henderson family's living room became an impromptu command center. Carol Henderson, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness, answered calls on a dedicated phone line installed by the police department. David Henderson, Rachel's father, led search parties during the day and pored over maps at night, marking areas that had been covered and identifying new locations to investigate. Rachel's younger brother, Jason, just 14, stapled flyers to telephone poles until his hands were raw. "I keep thinking she'll just walk through the door," he told a local reporter, "like this is all some mistake." 3 days into the search, an anonymous caller to the police tip line claimed to have seen a girl matching Rachel's description being forced into a blue pickup truck near Lake Jordan, a reservoir about 15 miles northeast of Montgomery. The tip redirected the investigation's focus dramatically. Lake Jordan, with its 188 miles of shoreline and numerous secluded coves, presented a formidable search challenge. The Alabama Marine Police deployed 4 boats equipped with sonar technology. Volunteer divers from as far away as Birmingham joined the effort, methodically searching the murky waters near boat ramps and fishing piers. For 6 days, the search at Lake Jordan continued while hope slowly eroded. Divers recovered numerous items, fishing equipment, waterlogged clothing, even a submerged rowboat, but nothing connected to Rachel. The sonar detected several anomalies on the lake bottom, each requiring painstaking investigation, each ultimately proving to be fallen trees or accumulated debris. "Lake Jordan's not giving up its secrets easily," said Marine Officer Terrence Jackson after a particularly grueling day. "But we're not giving up either." The anonymous tip that had sent investigators to Lake Jordan was eventually deemed a false lead, one of dozens that flooded the tip line in the weeks following Rachel's disappearance. Some came from well-meaning citizens who genuinely believed they had seen something significant. Others came from attention seekers or individuals with mental health issues who inserted themselves into high-profile cases. Each tip, no matter how implausible, required investigation. Detectives followed up on reported sightings of Rachel in Birmingham, Atlanta, and even as far away as Nashville. They interviewed registered sex offenders within a 50-mile radius, checked alibis, and collected DNA samples for comparison with evidence found at the scene. One particularly cruel false report came from a caller claiming to be Rachel herself, saying she had run away to Florida with a boyfriend. Voice analysis quickly determined the caller was an adult woman, not a teenage girl. The call was traced to a payphone outside a Montgomery convenience store, but security footage was too grainy to identify the caller. By mid-June, the investigation had generated over 400 leads. None had panned out. The FBI, which had joined the case after the first week, brought in behavioral analysts who developed a profile of the likely abductor, a white male between 25 to 40, familiar with the area, possibly with a criminal history, who had been watching Rachel and planning the abduction. For the Henderson family, the emotional toll was devastating. Carol took a leave of absence from her accounting job, unable to focus on anything but finding her daughter. David continued working construction during the day. They needed the income more than ever, but spent evenings and weekends coordinating with police or leading searches. "The not knowing is the worst part," Carol confided to her sister during a rare moment of vulnerability. If something terrible happened, I just want to bring her home. And if she's out there somewhere alive, I want her to know we're never going to stop looking." The psychological impact of having a missing child is unlike any other trauma. Dr. Elaine Christiansen, a psychologist who volunteered counseling services to the Henderson family, explained the phenomenon to reporters. "When someone dies, there's a finality that eventually allows the grieving process to progress," she said. "With a missing person, the family exists in a state of ambiguous loss, unable to fully grieve because there's still hope, but unable to move forward because there's no resolution. It's a particularly cruel form of psychological torture." This limbo affected each family member differently. Carol became hyper-vigilant, startling at every phone ring, scrutinizing every teenage girl she saw on the street. David channeled his anguish into action, becoming increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as inadequate effort from law enforcement as the weeks passed. Jason, Rachel's brother, withdrew into himself, his grades plummeting as he struggled to concentrate at school. Friends reported he would sometimes sit in Rachel's room for hours, just staring at her possessions, her CD collection, her stuffed animals, the posters on her wall, as if they might offer some clue to her whereabouts. The community's support, while well-intentioned, sometimes added to the family's burden. Well-wishers brought casseroles and offered prayers, but often expected emotional updates or reassurances in return. Some neighbors avoided the Hendersons entirely, unsure what to say, and uncomfortable with the reminder that tragedy could strike so close to home. By July, media attention had begun to wane. Rachel's story, once featured prominently on local newscasts, was relegated to brief updates. The volunteer search teams dwindled from hundreds to dozens, then to just a handful of dedicated friends and family members. Detective Wilson maintained regular contact with the Hendersons, but his updates became less frequent as new leads dried up. The investigation remained active, but the sense of urgency had diminished. Other cases demanded attention, resources were reallocated. For the Hendersons, this gradual shift was another form of loss. The realization that the world was moving on while they remained frozen in time, still waiting for Rachel to come home. If you're finding this case as compelling and heartbreaking as I do, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. The more people who hear Rachel's story, the better chance we have of reaching someone who might remember something important. Every cold case solved begins with someone speaking up, often years after the fact. Your simple act of sharing could be the catalyst that finally brings answers to the Henderson family. By the one-year anniversary of Rachel Henderson's disappearance, the investigation had entered what law enforcement officers somberly refer to as the cold case phase. The dedicated task force had been disbanded, the tip line reduced to a voicemail box checked weekly rather than hourly, and Detective Marcus Wilson had been reassigned to other cases. Though he continued to review the Henderson file during off hours, the transition wasn't marked by any official announcement or decisive moment. Instead, the case cooled gradually, like bathwater left unattended, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably cold. "We never stop investigating," Police Chief Robert Simmons insisted during a press conference marking the anniversary, "but we have to be realistic about allocating resources where they can do the most good." For the Henderson family, this practical approach felt like abandonment. They marked the grim milestone with a candlelight vigil at the spot where Rachel's shoe had been found. Fewer than 50 people attended, a stark contrast to the hundreds who had joined searches the previous year. Carol Henderson, who had aged a decade in 12 months, addressed the small crowd with quiet dignity. "Someone knows what happened to my daughter," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears tracking down her face. "Someone has carried this secret for a year. I'm begging you to come forward. We just want to bring Rachel home." As active investigation waned, theories about Rachel's fate multiplied. Some were plausible, others bordered on the fantastical, but all reflected the community's need to make sense of the senseless. The most prevalent theory centered on a serial predator passing through Montgomery. Supporters of this idea pointed to similar disappearances in neighboring states. Young women vanishing while walking alone, their belongings scattered as if they'd struggled. None of these cases had been definitively linked to Rachel's, but the pattern was troubling enough that the FBI maintained a regional database tracking the similarities. Another theory focused on Rachel's job at the Chevron station. Perhaps she had witnessed something she shouldn't have, a drug deal, money laundering, or some other criminal activity, and was silenced because of it. Investigators had thoroughly examined this angle, reviewing security footage and interviewing regular customers, but found nothing suspicious beyond the occasional shoplifter. Some in the community whispered about Rachel's family, particularly after David Henderson moved out in 2003, unable to bear the strain the disappearance had placed on his marriage. Though police had cleared the family of any involvement, rumors persisted, fueled by true crime shows that often portrayed family members as the most likely perpetrators. The most outlandish theories came from self-proclaimed psychics and amateur sleuths who contacted the family with visions of abandoned wells, remote cabins, or specific coordinates in wooded areas. Out of desperation, the Hendersons followed up on many of these leads themselves, each fruitless search reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching this video? Drop the time in the comments below. It's fascinating to think about how this story is reaching people across different time zones. Perhaps some of you watching in the middle of the night, unable to sleep, while others are starting their day with this chilling tale. Wherever and whenever you're watching, I appreciate you being here. As the years passed, Montgomery itself changed. The Chevron station where Rachel had worked was renovated, its security system upgraded. The spot where she had stood behind the register now occupied by a self-service coffee bar. Robert E. Lee High School, where her locker had been preserved for a year after her disappearance, eventually assigned the locker to a new student who knew Rachel only as a sad story mentioned during freshman orientation. New housing developments sprang up on the outskirts of town. The population grew, businesses opened and closed, politicians came and went. Life continued its relentless forward motion. For most Montgomery residents, Rachel Henderson became a cautionary tale, a reason parents warned teenagers not to walk alone at night, a name invoked when new streetlights were installed or neighborhood watch programs were formed. Her disappearance had briefly shattered the community's sense of security, but that security had gradually been rebuilt, reinforced by the passage of time and the absence of similar incidents. By 2010, when Detective Wilson transferred the case files to the department's cold case storage facility, Rachel's name rarely appeared in local media. The annual vigils had stopped after the 5th year, when only the immediate family and 2 former teachers had attended. The dedicated website Carol had maintained, findingrachel.com, received fewer and fewer visits until she finally let the domain expire in 2012. What no one in Montgomery realized was that the person responsible for Rachel's disappearance walked among them all those years. They shopped at the same grocery stores, waited at the same traffic lights, perhaps even attended the same churches or community events as the Henderson family. This individual watched as the search parties combed the woods and dragged the lake. They read the newspaper articles about the investigation hitting dead ends. They may have even expressed sympathy to friends about the tragic case, all while harboring the darkest of secrets. They observed as Carol Henderson's hair turned grey and her shoulders stooped under the weight of unresolved grief. They saw David Henderson move to Birmingham after the divorce, starting a new family, but keeping Rachel's photo in his wallet. They noticed when Jason Henderson, unable to escape his sister's shadow, left Montgomery for college and never moved back. The perpetrator lived with their secret through technological advancements that transformed forensic science. Improvements in DNA analysis, digital forensics, and facial recognition that might have identified them had the evidence been processed with modern techniques. Yet they remained confident that time had erased their tracks, that memories had faded, that witnesses had moved away or died. For 24 years, this individual built a life on the foundation of their terrible secret. They may have achieved success, earned respect, even started a family, all while the evidence that could destroy everything they had built sat in a cardboard box in the basement of the Montgomery Police Department, waiting for someone to look at it with fresh eyes and new technology. The person who took Rachel Henderson from her family didn't realize that some secrets refuse to stay buried forever, that evidence has a patience that outlasts human memory, and that justice, though delayed, was still coming for them. January 2025 brought a significant change to the Montgomery Police Department. After years of budget constraints, the City Council finally approved funding for a dedicated cold case unit. The initiative came partly in response to advances in forensic technology and partly due to public pressure following the successful resolution of a 1993 homicide in neighboring Jefferson County through genetic genealogy. Detective Sarah Reeves, a 15-year veteran with a background in forensic science, was appointed to lead the new unit. Her first task was to review hundreds of unsolved cases and identify those with the highest probability of resolution through modern techniques. "I'm looking for cases with preserved physical evidence," she explained during an interview with the Montgomery Advertiser. "DNA, fingerprints, trace evidence, anything we can re-examine with technology that didn't exist when the cases were originally investigated." The Rachel Henderson disappearance immediately caught Reeves's attention. Not only did it remain one of Montgomery's most notorious unsolved cases, but the evidence box contained items that had never been fully analyzed using modern methods. On a cold February morning, Reeves pulled the Henderson file from storage and began methodically reviewing every document, photograph, and piece of evidence. She was particularly interested in Rachel's recovered notebook, specifically the pages that had been exposed to the sprinkler system the night of the disappearance. In 2001, investigators had focused on the legible entries in the notebook, particularly Rachel's mention of being watched during her walks home. The water-damaged pages, with their blurred ink and stuck-together surfaces, had been photographed but largely dismissed as unreadable. Sometimes what seems useless is actually the most valuable evidence, Reeves would later explain. It's just waiting for the right technology to reveal its secrets. Reeves sent the notebook to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, requesting advanced imaging analysis using techniques developed for recovering text from ancient manuscripts and damaged historical documents. The process involved multispectral imaging, photographing the pages under different wavelengths of light to reveal details invisible to the naked eye. While waiting for those results, Reeves re-examined Rachel's recovered shoe. The original investigation had noted a partial fingerprint on the rubber sole, but it contained too few points of comparison to be useful in 2001's fingerprint databases. Reeves wondered if modern algorithms might find matches that earlier systems couldn't. She also ordered new DNA testing on microscopic samples collected from the shoe's interior. In 2001, DNA testing required relatively large samples and could only identify or exclude specific individuals. By 2025, techniques had advanced to the point where even touch DNA, skin cells left behind when someone handles an object, could potentially yield usable profiles. 3 weeks later, the first breakthrough arrived. The multispectral imaging had recovered previously unreadable text from the water-damaged notebook pages. Most entries were mundane: school assignments, work schedules, song lyrics. But one passage, dated May 15, 2001, stood out. Mr. D offered me a ride again today, third time this week. Says it's not safe to walk alone. Maybe he's right, but something about the way he watches me makes me uncomfortable. Told him I prefer walking, he seemed annoyed. The entry was significant but frustratingly vague. Mr. D could refer to dozens of people in Rachel's life: teachers, neighbors, customers at the Chevron station. Reeves compiled a list of every male whose name began with D from the original case files, including David Daniels, the afternoon cashier at the Chevron, Dale Thompson, Rachel's history teacher, and Darren Wilson, a regular customer at the gas station. The second breakthrough came from the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. The partial fingerprint from Rachel's shoe, when run through modern fingerprint recognition software, returned a possible match, not to anyone in the criminal database but to fingerprints from an unrelated case, a 2018 background check for a position on the Montgomery School Board. The name attached to those fingerprints: Douglas Mercer. Reeves immediately pulled Mercer's information. In 2001, he had been a 32-year-old math teacher at a middle school adjacent to Rachel's high school. Though he hadn't taught Rachel directly, their schools shared sports facilities and occasionally held joint events. More significantly, Mercer's commute would have taken him past the Chevron station where Rachel worked. The connection was tenuous but intriguing. Reeves dug deeper into Mercer's background and discovered something the original investigation had missed. Before becoming a teacher, Mercer had worked part-time as a delivery driver for a local pharmacy, a pharmacy that regularly delivered medications to the Henderson household for Carol's mother, who lived with them and suffered from rheumatoid arthritis. This potential connection to Rachel, combined with the fingerprint match and the Mr. D reference, Douglas could be shortened to Doug, warranted further investigation. Reeves assembled a small team, including Detective Marcus Wilson, now nearing retirement, but eager to revisit the case that had haunted him for decades. The team worked methodically, careful not to alert Mercer to their renewed interest. They discovered he had risen through the educational ranks over the years, becoming a principal in 2010, and eventually securing a position on the district's administrative team. He had married in 2005, had 2 children, and was widely respected in the community for his work with at-risk youth. On paper, he looked like the last person you'd suspect, Wilson admitted, but that's often the case with predators who evade capture for years. They build lives that provide perfect cover. The investigation gained momentum when the DNA results came back from Rachel's shoe. The sample was degraded, but yielded a partial profile that, while not conclusive enough for court, indicated the DNA likely belonged to a male relative of Mercer's son, who had participated in a school genetics project in 2023 that involved voluntary DNA submission. Armed with this circumstantial evidence, Reeves obtained a warrant to search Mercer's digital devices and installed surveillance on his home and workplace. The digital search revealed something disturbing. Mercer maintained an encrypted folder containing news articles about Rachel's disappearance, saved under innocuous file names related to historical case studies. The final piece fell into place when investigators, executing a search warrant on Mercer's home while he was at work, discovered a hidden compartment in his garage containing a small box. Inside was a silver charm bracelet with a heart-shaped pendant, identical to one Rachel was wearing in her school photos and described in the original missing person report. On April 17, 2025, Douglas Mercer was brought in for questioning. After 6 hours of interrogation, faced with the mounting evidence against him, he confessed to abducting Rachel Henderson on May 18, 2001. The details of his confession, which I'll share in the next section, revealed how a seemingly upstanding community member had harbored such a dark secret for nearly a quarter century, and how close he had come to getting away with it entirely. I'm curious, what's the weather like where you're watching from today? Drop a comment below describing the conditions outside your window. Is it sunny and bright, or dark and stormy? Sometimes I think our environment affects how we process these dark stories. A rainy day might make this case feel even more chilling, while sunshine might make it seem more distant, like something that couldn't happen in your community. But the truth is, these cases occur everywhere, in all kinds of weather, in all kinds of communities. While you're in the comments, I'd love to hear your theories about how Mercer managed to evade justice for so long. What mistakes do you think investigators made in the original case? What clues might they have overlooked? What would you have done differently if you were leading the investigation? Your insights might be more valuable than you realize. Many cold cases have been solved because of observations from people just like you. Douglas Mercer's confession, recorded in a sterile interview room at the Montgomery Police Department, sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The man sitting across from Detectives Reeves and Wilson, graying at the temples, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, bore little resemblance to the monster they had pursued for decades. "I never meant for it to happen," Mercer began, his voice steady despite the gravity of his admission. "I just wanted to talk to her." The truth, as it emerged over 6 hours of questioning, was both simpler and more disturbing than investigators had theorized. Mercer had first noticed Rachel in early 2001 while picking up prescriptions at the pharmacy where he worked part-time. He began frequenting the Chevron during her shifts, making small talk, offering rides she consistently refused. His fixation grew over months, evolving from what he termed concern into something more sinister. He learned her schedule, adjusted his routine to intersect with hers, and eventually began following her home at a distance, watching from his car as she walked the darkened stretch near Huntingdon College. On May 18, 2001, Mercer made one final attempt to convince Rachel to accept a ride. When she refused again and seemed disturbed by his persistence, he panicked, fearing she would report him to authorities or her parents. "I just grabbed her arm," he said, demonstrating with a mechanical gesture that chilled the detectives. She pulled away, started running. I chased her. She lost her shoe, dropped her bag. I caught up to her near the broken streetlight. What happened next, Mercer claimed, was a blur, a common claim among perpetrators, attempting to distance themselves psychologically from their actions. He admitted to forcing Rachel into his car and driving to a remote area outside Montgomery. Though he initially denied intending to harm her, the physical evidence and timeline he provided contradicted this claim. The details of Rachel's final moments were recorded in the official transcript but withheld from public disclosure out of respect for the Henderson family. What investigators did reveal was that Mercer had buried Rachel's remains on undeveloped land that, in a cruel twist of fate, was later purchased by his father-in-law and converted into a hunting property where Mercer frequently spent weekends with his sons. He literally built a life atop his crime, Detective Reeves noted during a press briefing. While the Henderson family searched desperately for answers, he was having family barbecues within yards of where he had buried their daughter. Following his confession, Mercer led investigators to the burial site. On April 20, 2025, forensic anthropologists recovered remains confirmed through dental records to be Rachel Henderson. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be manual strangulation. The arrest of Douglas Mercer, respected educator, family man, and community leader, stunned Montgomery. Parents whose children had passed through his classroom reeled at the news. Colleagues who had worked alongside him for decades struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the crime he had committed. "I just can't process it," said Eleanor Winters, who had taught with Mercer for 15 years. Doug was the person who organized food drives for needy families, who stayed late to tutor struggling students. How do you make sense of that same person doing something so monstrous? The Montgomery School District placed Mercer on immediate administrative leave and offered counseling services to current and former students. His wife filed for divorce within days of his arrest, requesting her maiden name be restored and relocating with their children to another state. For the Henderson family, the arrest brought a complex mixture of emotions. Carol Henderson, now in her 60s and battling health problems exacerbated by decades of stress, expressed relief tinged with renewed grief. "I always knew Rachel would come home someday," she told reporters, her voice barely audible. "I just didn't know it would be like this." David Henderson traveled from Birmingham for the press conference announcing Mercer's arrest. Though he and Carol had been divorced for over 20 years, they stood together, supporting each other as they faced the cameras. "No parent should have to wait 24 years for justice," David said. "But we're grateful to Detective Reeves and her team for never giving up on Rachel." Jason Henderson, now 38 with a family of his own, spoke about the shadow his sister's disappearance had cast over his life. "Rachel missed everything: college, marriage, having children. She would have been an amazing aunt to my kids. That was stolen from all of us." The case against Douglas Mercer was ironclad. Beyond his confession, prosecutors had the physical evidence recovered from his home, the DNA and fingerprint matches, and most damning, Rachel's remains with injuries consistent with his account. Facing overwhelming evidence, Mercer agreed to plead guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. On September 12, 2025, Judge Elaine Harmon sentenced Mercer to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. In delivering the sentence, she addressed him directly. "For 24 years you walked free while the Henderson family lived in a prison of uncertainty and grief. Justice demands that you now spend the remainder of your life in a prison of concrete and steel." The resolution of Rachel Henderson's case represented more than justice for one family. It offered hope to countless others waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. It demonstrated that advances in forensic technology could shed light on decades-old crimes. Most importantly, it proved that no matter how much time had passed, the truth could still emerge. If you've been moved by Rachel's story and the decades-long journey to justice, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel is dedicated to sharing these important stories, not just the crimes themselves, but the investigative breakthroughs that finally bring answers to families who have waited far too long. Your subscription helps ensure these stories reach a wider audience, and you'll be notified whenever we release new videos about cases like Rachel's that deserve to be remembered. The resolution of Rachel Henderson's case after 24 years stands as a testament to the evolving nature of justice in the digital age. Cold cases, once relegated to storage rooms and considered practically unsolvable, have entered a new era where advanced forensic techniques can breathe life into dormant investigations, revealing truths long hidden in plain sight. For the Henderson family, the identification of Douglas Mercer and the recovery of Rachel's remains provided the closure they had sought for nearly a quarter-century. Though nothing could restore the years lost or heal all the wounds inflicted by her absence, knowing the truth allowed them to finally complete their grieving process. "We can visit her now," Carol Henderson said at Rachel's memorial service, held in May 2025 on what would have been her 41st birthday. "For 24 years, I've had nowhere to take flowers, nowhere to sit and talk to her. Now I do. The impact of Rachel's case extended far beyond her immediate family. The successful resolution prompted the Alabama state legislature to pass Rachel's Law in late 2025, allocating dedicated funding for cold case units in every county with a population over 100,000. The legislation also mandated regular review of unsolved missing persons cases and established a statewide database to track and preserve physical evidence. Detective Sarah Reeves, whose persistence broke the case, became an advocate for cold case investigation, conducting training sessions for law enforcement agencies across the Southeast. Every box in evidence storage represents someone's loved one, she often reminds participants. Every file represents a family waiting for answers. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Rachel Henderson's case is the reminder that time does not erase the truth. It merely conceals it, waiting for the right combination of technology, determination, and circumstance to bring it to light. For the countless families still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones, Rachel's story offers a powerful message. Never lose hope. The evidence exists. The truth endures. And someday, perhaps when least expected, justice will finally arrive.